Hey everybody, and welcome to this Sunday's video reflection and to Unedited Me. My name is Maicon Steuernagel. I'm the pastor at OiC International Church, and usually when we shoot these videos, I will shave, I will put on Sunday clothes, I will wax my beard and my mustache. Last Sunday was Norway's National Day and I even had a waistcoat and a bow tie. This week, I have a Batman t-shirt. I mean, it could be worse. It's Batman after all. And this t-shirt actually had my younger son saying that I was Batman for a while, which is pretty cool. It felt really nice until I picked him up to do a Batman move and immediately felt my back pull. And that's a great way of crushing a 3-year-old's fantasy, right? Sorry, Benjamin, but Batman really needs to lay down. But to be fair though, it's Adam West, right? Let's be honest, he had a dad bod and basically goes around in his pajamas. So, you know, if that's the standard, I guess I could be Batman. And yes, actually all of this has something to do with what I want to talk with you about today. Today is the third and final video of our Enduring Presence series, in which we've been talking about God's presence and the realities of suffering. Now, something exciting about this Sunday and when this video is being published is that some of us are actually finally meeting again. We decided that the best way to get to meet again and follow all the health recommendations and make the logistics work was to make a mix of services in homes, house churches as we call them, and services at the Bakehouden church building where we usually would meet. And this week is house church week, so some of us are actually meeting in our homes and watching this video together, which is great. Others cannot meet yet or not yet ready to meet and take that risk, or maybe live somewhere else in Oslo. But don't worry, these videos are still going to be posted for a while, so even if you can't join us, you can be with us through following up on these videos. So just be sure to subscribe on YouTube or follow us on Instagram, whatever is easier for you to keep updated and keep in touch. But back to Batman, God's presence, and the realities of suffering. I want to talk today about the kind of suffering that often happens behind the mask. And it's something that all of us deal with at some level. I know most of us don't go around in bat masks, black capes, and rubber abs, but there's often a lot more happening beneath the surface than what we let show. Because at our workplaces, at our study places, at church, with friends, definitely on social media, we are taught that we are supposed to have it all together. And if we don't, we should at least be good in putting a brave face on our lives. And I'm not talking just about having our sort of stuff together in the sense of having our jobs and careers and our economy and that kind of stuff together. That's definitely part of the picture, but I mean having ourselves together, our emotional, spiritual, and mental healths, and have ourselves together in that way. And I think we must admit that the church has often not done much to help here, and has in fact often done more damage. Sure, you can share your problems and struggles as long as you put a spiritual spin on them, as long as you don't poke any hot topic, and as long as you don't doubt or question any of the basic tenets of the Christian faith, because if you do that, you might very well get a Bible bashing instead of a listening ear or shoulder to cry on. Now, I know there's a lot of wonderful and fantastic stuff being done in churches as well, but right now this is a confession of sins and not a showcasing of virtues. And I really do think we might need more of the former than the latter. Because we need to admit that we struggle as Christians, as people, as human beings. We suffer, we struggle. We need to admit that we have doubts and wounds and traumas and whatnot. And especially in this time you are experiencing now with the global pandemic and all the measures that are being taken and the toll that it is exerting on us all, many of us will find ourselves in a tough spot, and we'll find that our normal coping mechanisms are suddenly taken away from us. And what do you do when you are quarantined with your fears and traumas? It may very well be that many of us are experiencing that our ghosts are gaining strength and becoming more tangible. So how do we deal with this as people of faith? Where is God in all this? And actually, I do think that the Bible is a good place to go, and I want to go there, and I think it has something for us if we use the Bible not as a brick, but if we instead go into its story and into its story to find companions. Because in the Bible, the heroes in the Bible, Batman has a dad bod and pajamas made from grandma's curtains or something. If we can sort of drop the Hollywood artificial abs, we will find real people who have real wounds. And we'll find also just how gentle and how genuinely interested Jesus is. The story I want to read with you now is from one of the big heroes, and he has some stuff he needs to deal with. The story is in the very end of the Gospel of John, so this is after Jesus' resurrection, in the very last chapter, chapter 21, and I'm going to read from verse 15, and this is what it says there. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said. "You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." So this story is about Peter, right? The leader of the apostles, the guy that Jesus named Rock, that's what Peter means, and said that he would build his church on, that Peter. And sure, it's true, often when we talk about Peter, we will also talk about his impulsivity, or we will talk about some of his character flaws and everything he had to work on, and so on and so forth. But still, we often frame it as a sort of overcoming story, a before and after kind of thing. When it comes to this story we've just read, this shows in that the story has very often been read with a focus on Peter's role as a leader of the early church. My New International Version translation of the Bible that I just read for you, it even has a subtitle before the story that says, "Jesus reinstates Peter." And that's a language aimed very much at his position as a leader. Now it's true, Peter was a prominent leader in the early church, and it's true that this text is part of the historical claim for the legitimacy of his leadership, and it may very well be that this story have played that role quite early, perhaps even before the writing of the Gospel of John. But having said that, I still think that might not be the main point of this conversation between Jesus and Peter. And I have two reasons for saying this. The first reason is that it doesn't seem like Peter was the kind of guy that had trouble taking the role of leader. He was quick to speak, he was quick to position himself, he was quite at ease with making strong statements about his positions. And in fact, on the very story that sort of sets the frame and the context for this conversation, the other disciples are shown to be following his lead already. After Jesus' resurrection, and he had appeared a couple of times, but the disciples didn't still quite know what to do with themselves. And Peter one day says, "I'm going fishing," and the whole group of the disciples says, "Well, then we're going with you," and they go. Also, the gospel writer who tells us this story, who is presumably the same John who was also part of this conversation as the disciple whom Jesus loved, he keeps on calling Peter, as he tells the story, he keeps on calling him Peter, Rock, even as Jesus chooses to repeatedly call him Simon, son of John. And I'll get to the particular detail of the name in a minute, because that already points to my second reason. So my first reason is Peter is sort of what we would call a natural leader. The second reason is that the way this conversation is framed in John's gospel doesn't point to Peter's strengths, to his sort of curriculum for being a leader, but points to his weaknesses. In fact, to some of his most shameful moments, we could say, in the Gospels. The context of this conversation, as I just pointed out, is this fishing trip. So the story starts with Peter and the disciples going out to fish. They spend a whole night fishing. They don't catch anything. In the morning, an unrecognized Jesus calls to them from the shore. Oh, do you have any fish? No, we don't. Okay, throw the nets on the other side. They do that and the nets come full of fish. And when that happens, they recognize that this is Jesus. And they recognize because this has happened before. And I can imagine Peter having a flashback to the very similar event many years before. And that is the first story of Peter's weakness. At that time, Peter was probably not yet a disciple. And after Jesus had used his boat as a kind of pulpit to speak to the crowd, Jesus had asked him, again after an unsuccessful fishing night, had asked him to throw the nets again. And he did that, and when Peter pulls and when the people in the boat pull the nets back up, they're full of fish. When that happens, Peter realizes there's something about Jesus, something different, something divine, that he was no ordinary man. And when Peter recognizes that, he recoils and he says, "Go away from me. I am a sinful man. Get away from me." Obviously, Jesus didn't, right? He sticked around and in fact called Peter to follow him. And back to the conversation in the end of the Gospel of John, there we have Jesus purposefully calling Peter Simon, son of John, repeatedly. Now, why is that meaningful? Well, it's meaningful because it was Jesus himself who had given the name Peter to Simon. The name Peter, that means rock. And the gospel writer Matthew tells the story, and as he tells it, he says that Jesus gave him that name when Simon, who at that point was already a disciple, declared that Jesus was the Messiah. And Jesus says he declared that by the Spirit. And that's a high moment in Peter's story that was immediately followed by Peter sort of stepping ahead of himself and telling Jesus that Jesus should stop with this foolish talk of dying, to which Jesus very strongly reacts and rebukes Peter. "Get away from me, Satan." Very strong words. And Peter has this shameful moment in front of the disciples. And Peter's weakness is on display. And then finally, there is the fact in the conversation in the end of the Gospel of John that Jesus asks the question 3 times. "Simon, do you love me? Simon, do you love me? Simon, do you love me?" And it had hardly been a month since Peter had 3 times denied that he knew Jesus and then seen him be crucified. So why does the gospel writer, why does Jesus bring all this stuff up, all these wounds and shameful memories up? Is Jesus really testing Peter? Is he checking if Peter really loves him and checking if Peter is up to the task of leader? I don't think that's what this is about. What I think Jesus doesn't want Peter to do what we so often do. He doesn't want Peter to pretend that the hurt isn't there. He doesn't want Peter to pretend that the wound somehow magically disappeared because Jesus resurrected. He wants Peter to admit to Jesus and to himself that this is part of his story. And then Jesus wants to tell Peter, "You can love me like that. I love you like that. Peter, we're going to be okay." If I imagine myself in Peter's place, this was the elephant in the room, right? He knew what he had done. What if he did it again? What if he denied his Lord again? What if Jesus didn't trust him anymore? How could he trust himself? Could he even forgive himself? He wasn't Peter, the rock. He denied Jesus. He had doubted Jesus. He wasn't a rock. He was just broken Simon. But Jesus speaks to Simon. "Simon, do you love me? Simon, do you love me? Simon, do you love me?" 3 times. As if he's saying, "I know, Simon, you denied me 3 times, but I'll still be there after each time, asking if you love me and still asking you to follow me." And Jesus doesn't offer Peter a magic solution. He doesn't snap his fingers and transform Peter into a super leader. He doesn't whisk away the harsh edges of Peter's personality. Instead, what Jesus does is he invites Peter to keep on following him and keep on loving him, and Jesus reassures his love for him. You will struggle, Peter, but in the end, we're going to be okay. And in fact, Peter the denier will even one day be brave enough to be a martyr for his Lord. One day. But today, the call is just to follow. Not to have it all figured out, not to pretend that the weakness and the doubts and the fears aren't there, but to follow. Not as a persona that has everything together and powerfully leads the flock, but as weak Simon, who is only called Peter, rock, because Jesus wants to call him that. Because Jesus shows him grace. This Peter who takes care of the sheep because he loves Jesus and Jesus loves him. If anything, Jesus is calling Peter to be vulnerable. To be vulnerable as a leader and to be vulnerable as a person. This isn't about Jesus getting the leader that he needs for his church. This is about Jesus caring for Peter. For all of Peter. For his spiritual, mental, and emotional health. And I think we also should listen and learn. Learn to be vulnerable. Learn that we don't have to have it all together to follow Jesus. Learn that we don't have to pretend to have it all together to love others and care for them. We got a lot to learn, I think. We got a lot to learn about making this kind of space in our communities, in our relationships, and in our lives. But even of Peter, even of the one whom Jesus called a rock, Jesus asked nothing less than vulnerability and nothing more than love from brokenness. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face towards each and every one of you and to everything that is going on and has happened in your lives. And may he bring you peace. Go in peace and serve the Lord.